Hi, everyone. This is Henne, Artistic Director of Theater Dybbuk. And as many of you know who are watching this, this is something we do every other week on Facebook to really have opportunities to talk about art, to think about theater and performance, to think about the ways in which we connect during this time and at other times as well. And again, for those just joining us, this is Henne, Artistic Director of Theater Dybbuk. And I'm in conversation today with one of my good friends and colleagues, longtime colleagues, Kate Hutter Mason, who is the owner of Stomping Ground L.A. and the founding artistic director of LA Contemporary Dance Company. And we'll get into it. But Kate, so glad you're with me.
Thank you so much. Yeah. I'm thrilled to be here and just nice to connect with such a dear friend and colleague. So thank you.
Thank you. So just before we dive in, I want to give the friends who are watching a little bit of context. So, you know, during these talks, we're often thinking about artistic process. We're thinking about sort of takes on why we do what we do and how we do it. And I just want to say a word about our work together so that people have a little bit of framing from that perspective. So when Kate was at the time the artistic director of LA Contemporary Dance Company, and I actually was an independent artist, had not yet started Theater Dybbuk, back in 2009. So we were 15. And yep, that sounds right. Yep, no problem. And we did a show called Body Mechanique, where we actually co-directed, and it was, I think, 5 dancers, 2 actors, some numbers along those lines. And we actually used a series of monologues I wrote that were about inanimate objects combined with performative contemporary dance to explore these monologues with spoken word from the actors who were also movement artists. And that was our first collaboration, which is pretty ambitious for a first collaboration, a full evening of...
Definitely get to know each other.
Yes, we got to know each other very well. And then we followed up on that with we were commissioned by the Natural History Museum of Los Angeles to create a little dance theater piece for families about spider mating, because like you do. That's right. And then I think our largest collaboration was in 2012. And for those who are familiar with Theater Dybbuk, our inaugural production was called Cave, A Dance for Lilith. And it was actually a co-production with LA Contemporary Dance Company. And it was exploring Lilith folklore and Hebrew goddess mythology. Again, a number of dancers and actors together with live music by Eric Mason. And it really created this whole landscape. I think it was an hour and 3/4 piece of nonstop dance and dense spoken word as a first production for the company and our first co-production at the same time. And so we have a pretty long history, and we've, of course, in the years since been in a lot of just ongoing conversation. So I wanted to frame for folks our work together.
Oh, I love that. And also just brings up a lot of memories and, you know, amidst all of that, also, we were both working with our spouses.
Yes.
So add that to the mix, and you have a motley crew who, at the end of the day, needs to know how to also go home and sleep in the same space.
Totally. I mean, we could have a whole conversation just about the navigating those interpersonal waters. So indeed. So I just want to sort of transition now to say, you know, that so our work together was highly multidisciplinary and was engaging kind of on all fronts at once, right? Movement, sound, speech, you know, all the ways that bodies and voices interact, we were sort of allowing those to happen and collide. And I know that you as an artist, although dance is your primary language, you certainly exist as an artist in a lot of collaboration and partnership, and that you also exist in a lot of different spheres. And so I just want to name that not only are you the owner of Stomping Ground L.A., which we'll get to a little later, the details about that. As I mentioned, you're the founding artistic director of LA Contemporary Dance Company, now the board president, and also intersect and interact with a lot of artists in different spheres who you have brought into the company to work with you and who you have worked with in other forms. So I just kind of wanted to frame for people. And so before we get into the details of that work, tell us a little about yourself. You know, your what is a little of your background, a little bit of how you came to what you do.
Sure. Well, being a proud, I guess, descendant of Carson City, Nevada, woo woo. So small town, and really just finding my way in the world, and probably my copious amounts of energy as a child, finding my way into dance as well as rodeo. You know, that goes hand in hand. So being a ballet dancer, rodeo queen was, you know, the dream. And I don't know about becoming the rodeo queen, but certainly investing my life in things that are adventurous, courageous, and surround me with really interesting people was always a mainstay. And ended up certainly diving deep into dance, but probably in college was the time where I started to foster a lot of my other interests surrounding not just, you know, what happens on the stage, but the theatrical experience in total, and how I found people, you know, in that coveted ritual of going to experience things, being transported and elevated and questioning in things that you know, I have a lot of love for the ephemeral and things that you can't repeat. Of course, in a digital age, that is crushing, but but I really feel like there's something special and unique about, you know, gathering and certainly seeing what magic can happen without maybe yeah, the humans are magical, period. So then where do we foster imagination and kind of the convergence of an idea with reality, and transport people sometimes away from that reality, or put it under the microscope and really, like, let's identify what's going on here at a very core and emotional level. So yeah, so dance was kind of, you know, lack of a better term, my gateway drug to just finding theatrical experience to be actually, you know, a necessary ritual to society. And yeah, and put us in good conversation and concert very early on in my artistic directorship. And I only had, yeah, I'd been artistic director and founder and creator of co-creator of LA Contemporary Dance at that time since 2005. So, you know, 4 years under the belt, and I was like, what else, you know, where else? And you arrived, you know, through, I don't know how we actually became in first contact. I think you had reached out to me about maybe body mechanic, and, or it wasn't called that at that time, but the monologues. So
yes.
Yeah, so, you know, at face value, I can be definitely, you know, just I can get myself in trouble with this, but like another white girl, you know, like another vanilla, in, you know, in a beautiful, rich world. And I recognize that, and that's why I've always felt so motivated to just get in spaces where diverse voices and perspectives and backgrounds, and just we can all dance, you know, and see what we can co-create. So that's kind of been, I guess, my lead-in lineage. And I come from you know, two parents who are, one's an inventor physicist and the other is a business operations and physicist. And I, you know, some days I was like, how did I come out of that DNA? And then other days I'm like, absolutely, that is like my foundings. So yeah.
Well, it's interesting to hear you share that, because I will say one of the things, you know, it was before I started a company, and that I always admired and noted was this balance you do have of fully engaging, obviously, in every way in the creative endeavor, but also really understanding what it is to run a company, and the things and the organizational skills it takes to do so, and the understanding about delegation and about information, you know. So I hearing that about your parents, and you talking about some days I don't know where I came from, and other days is exactly where I live. That sounds like running a creative nonprofit, you know, like that's, or any, or for profit for that matter, whatever it may be. It sounds like running a business, you know, and that has creativity at its core. So So hearing that, and also hearing what you said about diverse voices and other considerations, let's talk about LA Contemporary Dance a little bit and how we met. And it's so funny when you're like, oh, early in my career running the company, right? I forget that actually 4 years into a company is still relatively new. Now that I've been running a company myself for some time, like at the time it felt like, oh, this established company I'm pitching on a project. So it's really a nice perspective. Yeah,
it's all how you wear it.
totally. So let's talk about LA Contemporary Dance Company. So you founded it in 2005, as you said, and you have an interest in making sure that in both a collaborative sense and a who's involved, there's diverse voices, there's a certain approach to how the company is run. So can you just share with us a little bit about the history and its approach and how it came about? You're now the board president. So I feel like this is a good space to kind of share about the company in a variety of ways.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's certainly the love of my life, my first marriage, if you will, and you know, declaring that you're an artistic director at 23 and having never been in a dance company yet to that time, and you know, forging ahead, just saying, I don't know if I quite see what I want yet as an organization in the world, and how can I create that, you know, fill that gap. And that's no judgment call on you know, anything that actually came before. It's really just building on those roots and saying, like, it's particularly in LA, I wasn't sure if there was a repertory company that spoke to really like not being the transient identity of LA, but being the rooted in LA, and how to, I guess, foster creative work here that's has a bit more staying power than maybe the identity of it being a commercial hub. So people moving here, utilizing their talents at around 26, 27, moving on because, you know, you can't sell gum with your, you know, body anymore. I don't know. That's a crass way to put it, but it's like, you know, aging also was not necessarily something that was fully embraced maybe in the how we thought of dance and kind of the aesthetics. So instead I was like, no, I feel like there's greater depth and I don't know, communal encouragement to say, like, we aren't just coming to hit a gig and move on. Like, where do we create environments of experimentation, of unveiling and peeling back, and processes that take longer than, you know, what the commercial might demand or the, you know, the gig might demand. But, you know, sitting in process, you know, to some sounds really fast to be in process only 6 weeks, but, you know, to me that was like a gift. Okay, we can churn, we can grapple, we can chew on things, but more than ever you saw artists coming together to work through things in a very deep and meaningful way, and a very vulnerable way. So once you got to stage, as I said, I just didn't want the polish. I wanted the human to still be relevant to the product and what people experienced when they come to one of our shows. So I really was excited to be like, okay, LA itself is, you know, regarded as a melting pot. Okay, how do we bring that to the stage? And in that motley crew of, as you said, diverse, you know, voices and people and body types and et cetera, how do we, yeah, how do you, instead of, you know, homogenize, how do you harmonize? How do you take divergent ideas and gifts differing and find the common thread and the tone and the beat that allows you to all move together? And that is where the, you know, for me, the magic would happen, is kind of in those places of, I wouldn't call it compromise, but where you have to meet people where they are and create something that's almost stands between you. So for me, LA Contemporary Dance was a way to place this group in the space and ask questions of it, and ask them to arrive with their own background, their own soul, their own food for thought, and to see where to collectively during that 6-week process we could create something greater than ourselves, and understand ourselves deeper through it. And at the end of that, what we brought to stage was only a part of process. Again, I wouldn't, you know, try to shine it into this mirrored ball and say like, consume. Instead, I was like, okay, now where does the audience meet us in this process? And so through that, I feel like I definitely developed an ethos or a consideration of a work environment as being the place of focus, and where do safe spaces and places of deep communication and vulnerability actually reveal our strengths, as opposed to tend to, coddle our weaknesses or kind of, I felt like there was a perspective on, for a good product to come out, or dancers to be on the same rhythm, et cetera, it has to be worked. It has to be, fostered through maybe fear and dictation. And instead, I found that the collaborative process, if trusted and if brought together in the right way and spirit, could be extremely revealing and provide very exciting results, like our work inside of a gallery space with dancers and moving bodies and asking the audience to move their chairs around, and you end up in a playground as opposed to something that's kind of commemorating a process that's already happened.
Yeah, that's great. So funny. I'll share with you, as you were talking about that, the moving the chairs around, I was thinking, just so people watching know that our first show together, we were in a very small gallery space called the Glass Garage Gallery that Henry Leon was the director of, and he was very kind. I mentioned this. Tasso was my interviewee 2 weeks ago, and we brought this up. Tasso, the photographer, filmmaker, and he what happened was we got into this space and realized, how do we use this space? So the weeks of rehearsal, suddenly we had to figure out new things because of the nature of the space. And at one point we had the entire audience go on kind of a line outside and go down the block and around and come back. And then the configuration of the space was completely changed. And that was something we learned in the process. And as you were saying, that the nature of process and collaboration allows for those kinds of realizations. And also, just to frame for people who may not be very familiar with LA Contemporary Dance, so it's a repertory company, traditionally often does a few shows a year with work by you have a core ensemble, right? But you also have guest artists and guest choreographers. So it's a mixture of internal, external. Am I right about the model?
Yep.
Great.
And and just really, I think it's always been LA centric in the sense that we really want to make sure that we're highlighting talent that exists in this beautiful city, but we're also, absolutely open to the collaborators from elsewhere to bring their gifts. And the model we set out with also is an interesting one, because it is one about transition. So as for myself, I transitioned out of the artistic directorship, and Genevieve Carson is our artistic director, and has been for the last 5 years. And to just see how as arts organizations, the ability to flex towards a future and remain relevant and really consider, a model has been really exciting. But it's also lovely to have those tenets of like, so operationally, we kind of do this. Like, that's actually very freeing, as opposed to tomorrow, what are we gonna do today? What, like, it just always flying by the seat of your pants. Like, it's beautiful, but exhausting. So like, where do you kind of create those tenets? And I think that's been helpful to now be celebrating our 15th anniversary. So.
Wow. So great. And thinking about flexing toward the future, as you were saying, I want to sort of talk about the endeavor that you began in relatively recent past, pre-pandemic, but relatively recent. I know sometimes it feels like that's been longer than it has. That you opened, or in process of opening, which we can talk about the dialogue between that, of Stomping Ground L.A, which is an art center for performance and practice, especially with a focus on movement. And I just want to hear a little bit about it, because this is a still relatively new endeavor for you, but one that I think certainly exists in a trajectory from and with LACDC. And so share with us a little bit about Stomping Ground L.A and about how it works and what the why and all of that good stuff.
Why would you take this on? Maybe wants to talk to me about real estate construction in the city of Los Angeles. permitting, any of these just deep thought topics, please reach out. But yes, the why was, certainly egged on by the idea of how LA Contemporary Dance has produced in the city of Los Angeles, and what home meant to us when we felt the security of returning to a space, especially when spaces feel sacred. You're doing deep investigative work. And I also was very aware that I didn't want that type of work and that type of investigation to be only thought of as something that few had access to. So meaning you have to be in a dance company to like go through these processes and consider these things as a creative life. I wanted to figure out how to extend that to, the interface public and also professional arts. So I definitely wanted to find something that had large amount of space, just because ideas often look at the containers that they have to be held within. So I was like, I want things that are expansive. I want things that feel bigger than ourselves. So that started as a premise and a principle. But I also wanted to feel intimate and like have that sense of security of a home. So, the glass ceiling of budget, of course, is always a consideration, but I finally did find I would say about after 7 years of looking, I finally found this wonderful, it was a print shop originally, so for fine art and books and things like that. And then there was a biker restoration kind of garage. So it was really exciting to meet those tenants and understand their work, and then to be like, well, I'm fostering an art form in sense, like, and they both were moving on to other spaces, so I felt okay with this. But yeah, so definitely there were the mechanics of finding a space and procuring that space and forming the essential elements that designed the space out. But really what what was the driver was this idea of kind of I have 2 kids and they're at the YMCA program. And I was like, I want this like place that anyone feels like, the access point is there. It's about the community and neighborhood. And then you decide what happens in that space, because really it's just a container. And so I was like, I want this idea of the YMCA for the arts, like, as a long-term like goal of like how we interface with both arts and also spaces. So so gesturing towards that, I started from a place that I know, which is dance, and really the essential ingredient of that was to have a sprung floor. So you can do anything on this floor, but I want to save everyone's knees. So that was the main priority. But beyond that, just feeling like access was and equity of that access. So not coveting it to any one group or use, because ultimately we haven't been asked much how we want to use the spaces that are around us. Usually the space is built, it's formed, and it dictates its purpose. Right. I instead was like, how do I kind of create this vessel that allows then the use cases and the purposing of it to come from, those that visit it, those that are in the community, those are in the neighborhood. So, right. So we're kind of arriving at our sense of self as we develop. And that goes along with, the first thing people are like, okay, I want to rent it, and what's the rate and availability? And I'm like, can we start with a conversation? What are you doing? What are you trying to do? What do you want to do? What makes that project sustainable? What rates meet the needs of your work? Like I just flipping the script a little bit from that transactional place and using this time of experimentation, if you will, to say like what actually allows us to sustain organizations and artists and families living creative lives, etc. And how does that then end up feeding this space and and the operational needs? I mean, it still takes money, but
Right.
Yeah, so I'm definitely feeling like that equation is leading me to some wonderful conversations about creative work.
So it's really interesting to hear about, the way in which you're thinking about this as a space that obviously there are very real business considerations, as you said, but it's a collaborative space where you want artists to feel that they are in a partnership as opposed to in a rental agreement, right? That we are in this together. So let's talk, let's have clarity about what the business needs are and what's possible so that we can figure out a way to make it work, as opposed to here's the boundary, that's it, right? Which I think is an interesting and useful way of thinking about space as a collaborative center, right? That it is a center for collaboration, and therefore even the way we treat it is collaborative. So hearing that's kind of the ethos and the way you've been operating, and you've been in a moment of experimentation with it because it's new, and now there's an extra layer of experimentation of starting a physical space that, within a first year of opening, you're in we can't gather in physical indoor space. So I just love to hear about kind of, what's happening, how you're navigating that, and what's going on with Stomping Ground L.A. and your thinking, and especially because we don't know how long this is going to be. So just share a little bit about your thoughts around that.
Yeah, I mean, certainly coming out with a tagline that says gather and create, you're like, oh, yeah, the human body like now is a risk. How do I consider that in, this creation of safe spaces and places of vulnerability when we, as just a world, are feeling vulnerable? And where do I still have the opportunity to create sensation of support, even if it's not within these four walls? So, I mean, there's been very specific considerations of like what it was to have people get back to space. So the pandemic occurred. I had at that point a whole season of performances and kind of some normal patter, which was so lovely. I was like, oh, these, we have a whole season basically, and then like 4 summer intensives and blah, 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 blah. And then you're like, hit like pause on literally life as I've known, in that spectrum, in that regard, and where, and how revealing and how interesting. And in a way, it was nice that maybe that season had never taken off. It happened literally right before I like hit like send on like let's put a blast out about this whole season. Like, so there was this moment of like, okay, silver lining. Like, we're not trying to backpedal on maybe everything, and instead, I have the opportunity to just keep launching as a new entity time and time again for whatever people need from me right now. So I feel fortunate in that regard, having tragically like watched now at least 5 studios that I know of, specific to movement arts. And I definitely don't know the breadth and depth of other small business closures, that are impacting our city, but in a way I'm like, oh my gosh, like had I been constrained by maybe these other like ways of working and models, there would not have been a way forward that seemed, flexible. So in a way, it's like I'm deeply grateful that I was able to navigate and also ask people, well, what makes you feel safe? What would allow you to get back to some of your practice? Having first, a couple people come in May and just run like around the space. I was like, oh my God, it's like childlike wonder again about what is the opportunity that's, within us and within these spaces. So, yeah, I've just been trying to channel that and really be specific in how I respond to people, like individually, as opposed to maybe trying to fulfill like this market sector need or this industry need. I'm like, we don't know. It's very disrupted, but what does that person need? And what does that artist need? Like, where do individually are we going to start beckoning and calling back the things that we feel society and our communities need? And so, yeah, it's been pretty like popcorn. But right now, more than ever, I feel extremely encouraged, because I just feel like people are like knocking at the door and saying like, I just have an idea. Like, I don't know if I'll ever be able to perform it, but I just need to make. And I'm like, let's do this. Like,
Great.
let's jam. So I think, interestingly, the content will come first and then the forum will develop, as opposed to I need to make a lot of content for this specific, like it used to be this performance or this class or this thing. Well, the containers are like gone, but like then it's like what's in the ether, and trying to capture some of that.
So I'm curious, connected to this, will you share a little bit about, I know it's popcorn and it's anecdotal, right? But
Yeah.
but who doesn't love popcorn? Come on. That I'm curious about what you are hearing a little bit in terms of what, like, without giving away maybe some, confidential things about projects, but in terms of like what you're hearing about what people need, space to run, like something that sometimes we don't even think about, like, oh, just space to, like, I'm normally in a studio rehearsing, the ability to just be in a studio, even if we're not quote unquote rehearsing, and to have space. What out of these conversations, what's striking you? What's coming up?
I think there's a real license that people have given to maybe their art form may have become such a product that they were so used to like hawking and selling and like moving forward, and that progression being kind of marks of success. And due to this, they've almost reclaimed, I feel like, the impetus or the desire and maybe some of those scales of success for themselves, of like, it's like a reorientating moment maybe for the artists, and to not feel so driven by maybe an expectation or just again that forum that had often become so insular too. Like doing a dance performance had become, am I making this for the dance community, dancers? You just heard yourself kind of in this like vacuum. And now it's like, there's so much broader perspective, I think, on maybe the why they are engaging with it and what they need from it as a dance practice or a ritual or a way to digest the happenings of the world around us. And I think it's really, again, optimist, silver lining person, but I think it's a really important time for all of us, no matter, what our fields are, work, to concentrate on that why as a motivating, force, and to know that it's really important for us to find those places of understanding success or where we're what we're going after, because it's going to feel pretty individualized for maybe a little while now, but no, collectively we can really move the dial if we focus in that way and really get deliberate about being authentic to that.
Right. So hearing that, I mean, I think that's right. There's sort of a great new consideration happening, right? We were all on a sort of track or treadmill of where we're headed, the way things happen, where are we going? And that this disruption has us ask different questions about the reasons for doing what we do or doing something else, and in new ways, and or some combination of new and old. And I think, so thinking about whys, I want to also just, we have a few more minutes. I just want to ask a little bit about, you've demonstrated, a commitment in your work to multidisciplines, or to thinking about, I was, you founded a contemporary dance company, but inside that, you were often engaging with other forms, sometimes speech. Like with us, it was fully theater and fully dance. You work with a variety of collaborators who come from different perspectives. And I'd just love to hear, I mean, you shared a little about this earlier, but I'd love to hear a little bit more about kind of that, your fundamental commitment to that kind of collaboration,
Mhm.
as opposed to it being sometimes we collaborate with people, right? Because there's a difference
Sure.
in perspective. So I'd love to just hear a little bit about why that's fundamental to your work.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think the containers with which, or the modalities we use to like try to spur on the creative process and our imaginations, like I feel like at least I found maybe in some of our work, like the inroads or the ways to start as a theater practitioner were different than the dancer, were different than the lighting designer's process, than the, you know, costume designers, etc. But it's in the kind of convergence and confusion and chaos of all those different methods coming together that you often then start to develop a culture, a rehearsal culture, or a creative culture of your own that reminds me a lot of like, so now I'm dipping into like when I was in grad school, but like I wrote a lot about square dance and the magic of like converging and diverse cultures and people that don't speak the same language. And so I feel like in that situation, you had this beautiful moment of like creating something totally new in that room. And so my hope, always with a collaboration, is having it be successful, is to have it not take the easiest route, but more where we collectively converge and kind of create society again, or a collaborative process again.
We're in the moment. It's still streaming live. Look at that.
Do this.
Amazing. I'm going to hit record. So Kate, you may have been like live streaming. Just
I don't know. Yeah. I was like, oh, okay. And you know, this is the tech world. I mean, see, this is when like, I don't know, I slip on stage in my own sweat. I don't know what this you call it, but like I'm used to all of it and any of it. So
totally. I mean, it is kind of, I just want to pause for a second and acknowledge like this is, as we're talking about, has come up in the conversation, the transitions of this moment. Like we've been now doing these live talks for 5-6 months. And we thought after like 3 weeks, like we got it down, like things seem to be, oh, we had a crash or two at first and my computer probably was on too long and just gave out. It was tired. It's been working hard. But I actually want to just step away for a moment and have a reflection of like the beauty of this moment. Is that, I don't know about you, but like when things would happen in performance where something would go wrong, even technically, like it's not that anybody made a mistake, things happen. That there is a kind of perfectionism of, oh no, what does this mean? And what I find is in this moment, the beauty of our time right now is that there's sort of a great understanding of we're all in this sign of uncertainty, and technology is sometimes out of our hands, that I actually think has a beauty for us, for those who lead performance groups and such, because I feel like I'll just speak for myself. It's teaching me something about self-forgiveness, understanding, being in community, that we're in it together, as opposed to we're just giving you something that's whole and complete, like it's just a little wrapped gift. That I this moment just made me reflect on that.
Well, no, it's super important, because I feel like we've been pretty critical of ourselves, and in good ways to help us grow and benefit, etc. But the, I guess, beauty of live performance that I've always loved is the humanity of it, that there's no way to be perfect, you know, and where there is forgiveness, but the moment you see something occur in a live performance, you're also like, as an audience member, 10 times more invested, because suddenly you're like, oh, like this is real. And it's like, thank you, yes it is, and I did just fall in front of all. So like, you know, there's something so coveted. And also, yeah, I mean, the whole world is trying to do new things, and like if you ask somebody like, when was the last time you did something totally brand new, often it takes a lot of pause. And now it's like, well, daily I'm like, well, I'm using some platform or doing something, or like I break out in like cold sweats just trying to post something on Instagram. I feel like I'm like ancient. I'm like, ooh, like I'm like but you know, but like really it's tuning us to be like that muscle of empathy, and also forgiveness, and also like calm down, like give people a chance, is really important and humbling, and just gets us out of that mindset of like, what really is essential here? We're having a conversation. That's essential.
That's right.
Did your computer poop out and, go away for a hot second? Yes, it is Friday and it's tired. But like, like even your computer needs some empathy. Fine. But
it's done me so well. It's done me so well.
well.
I'm rubbing it right now.
Like, I think we're in a really unique moment to ask, like, what are we judging and why, and
absolutely,
what do we create anxiousness and hysteria for no good reason, or do we just
so thanks. I hear you. And I also do want to, in the last couple minutes, sort of return to where we were leaving off, because you were saying very compelling things. So let's just go back there for a second.
Sure.
About the nature of this sort of multidisciplinary engagement and collaboration that you were sharing about, kind of your ethos and the why behind it, so to speak, the reason and how it operates. So just continue, please.
Sure. I mean, I think, the underlying desire I have is to peel back and maybe be uncomfortable a bit inside of things that feel so regimented and routine. And often that's inviting in these other voices and these other ways of working, to kind of shine light on the gaps, maybe in my understanding of like what I'm even trying to do. And also I was saying, like, you in a way create a new creative culture or a way of working whenever you have exposure to someone else's like influence and process. It doesn't mean you have to immediately glom on and forget who you are. It just means like, how do you, and this is just a microcosm of society. Like, how do we move into a new neighborhood and assimilate some pieces as well as bring yourself to that, and be proud of kind of the mix, and see where at the end of the day, certainly in the creative process, you're going to create something so unique and specific to that gathering, that cluster of humans, that grouping of ideas, that there's no copy paste of it. You're going to just it's going to be completely explorative. And I love being totally thrown off my balance by somebody asking that question, or being like, why do you want, like, why do you warm up that way? Like, why don't we do a vocal warm up instead of a movement warm up, or or you're going to wear this costume that totally restricts all your movement. Now do the dance, like it breaks open the boundaries. And my other life is, working in aerospace design and manufacturing, primarily aerospace, a variety of applications. But working with a lot of engineers and A to B, type people. And then I end up the wild artist that's like, let's meander around in this idea. And, and I can tell that maybe I'm the collaborative party they never invited to the table or thought to, but here I am. And it's quite lovely where we come to a means of an end in some of our conversations. And it's not like every day I sit around thinking, how am I going to change the process, or how am I going to change minds? It's instead asking the right questions and developing a dialogue that's rich. And we might come to the same terms at the end of that conversation, or make that product, or go this way with the market. But the conversation itself is transformative.
Right.
And that's how I feel like the creative process is as well.
Absolutely. I mean, I'll share one memory, and then I'll just ask you one or two things to close out. But, I remember the first time we worked together, and speaking of that kind of different disciplines and different ways of thinking, I come to it as a playwright where I'm thinking about story structure. And I remember you saying to me in an early rehearsal at one point, something along the lines of, well, we've just had a trio, maybe we need a solo. And I was like, wait, what? Oh, that's a structure too, right? Because I come to it as a playwright thinking in a much different way. But that kind of dialogue creates such richer work, because suddenly the structural questions on the table were different structural questions than the ones I knew to ask. and probably some vice versa as well. But I'm just pointing that out because I think that's a very strong example of that, where that sort of blew my mind, right? It was my first time collaborating with a dance company, and this idea that a structure might be there was a trio, and so now there's a solo,
right?
you know?
Or like, yeah, like what a balanced stage picture is at this point, and how it speaks to the dramatic like moment, and yeah, and you know, it's like someone that's used to, you know, painting now has sculpting clay, and it's like, yeah, what am I doing with this? But like somehow, you know, in the convergent processes, we end up with something that has like, you know, great dramatic, you know, what do I say, like cadence, as well as, you know, speech, as well as a stage picture, as well as a, you know, the spotlight in the right way, you know, like,
yeah, absolutely.
Cool.
So to close us out, you've shared a little bit already about the nature of how you're navigating this moment, but is there anything else? I mean, and I kind of asked this of all my guests. We're in this moment, as we know, of challenge, upheaval in a variety of ways. And anything else that you want to share about the work you're doing or the way you're thinking about work because of this moment, that, and like I said, we've touched on a lot already, so no expectation, but if there is anything else you want to say about that, please.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like more than ever, maybe I'm thinking a lot about legacy, and these broader swaths of time and impact, and that we're in a civil rights movement, not a moment, that we're working through a pandemic, not a isolated, you know, oh, it's, you know, I'm not sick, so I, you know, this can't be a big deal. Like that the broadness of who we are as a human well extends beyond ourselves, whether we want to acknowledge it or not, and foster it or not. So Stomping Ground for me has become something that I'm excited to see my kids and their kids preserve and carry forward and develop. And, you know, celebrating 15 years with LA Contemporary Dance, I'm like, who was that child that started this? And do I know any more? Like, what if I started today, would I be any better at it? Probably not. So like, you know, just reckoning time, I think, has been freeing to be like, I like working on these really broad ideas about impact and who we are and how we move through the world. And yes, daily decisions absolutely add into that.
Yeah.
But legacy and just long-term impact is super important, because the moments can feel very intense.
Yeah. I hear that. Thank you. That's I appreciate that reflection. So last thing before we close out, any place you want to, any, you know, websites, the usual, tell people check this out, see what we're up to, that kind of thing.
Oh, right. Yeah. I mean, so Instagram, Stomping Ground L.A. is a great place, just because the wonderful and beautiful people that I get to work with, Kira and Chelsea, they curate that Instagram page. As I said, cold sweats, not me. But they curate that and involve a lot of things that are happening around LA, great conversations happening. And we also have community calls as Stomping Ground LA, where we invite people to just come commune, not in a space, but on Zoom. And so would love to have, you know, broader perspectives and more people join those. They're not dance specific. They're the last one we were wrangling kind of what is the consideration of arts curriculum as we move into this new world. So definitely check us out on Instagram and Facebook. And then LA Contemporary Dance Company, we're celebrating our 15th anniversary, as I said, and would love for you to check out some mostly filmed work at this moment, as well as some classes. So lacontemporarydance.org.
Great. Thank you, Kate. Such a pleasure. And thanks to everyone for your patience with the glitch. Glad you stayed with us or came back. And I'll be back in 2 weeks with another guest, actually, Leslie Gray, who is a production designer, puppet designer, visual artist, who is also a theater dybbuk artist. And so I'll be happy to have her join me. I hope everyone has a good weekend, stays as safe and healthy as possible. And Kate, thank you again. Such a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Aaron. It's lovely to see you. And thanks for catalyzing these great conversations. Really
my pleasure. Thank you. All right, everyone, take care. Be well. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.